Hey, hello everybody. This is All Source News, also known as Stefano Rittendale. And thank you so much for joining me in another set of videos where we're going to discuss about Mexican cartels. And in this specific video, I want to talk about the state of Guanajuato. And the reason why is if you saw my video that I uploaded yesterday, my YouTube short, where I talked about this mass casualty, this mass shooting event, well, I'll discuss later on in this video, I think it kind of warrants an explanation of the state of Guanajuato and the different cartels and actors involved there, and why we generally see Guanajuato being, if not the most violent state in Mexico with the highest amount of homicides and killings, one of the most highest, right? And it's also one of the states where we generally see the highest level of casualties for local police, targeted assassinations and attack, really focus on municipal police and state police in the state of Guanajuato, right? And so Guanajuato is one of the most violent states in Mexico. But what's very interesting is that when you're analyzing Guanajuato and you're seeing the different actors involved, if you try to analyze it from the construct of a drug trade, let's say cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamines, anything like that, it actually doesn't make sense. It doesn't really necessarily explain why violence is so high. And this is one of the key areas that I generally tell people, if you want to focus on cartels, you can't just look at it through the prism of the war on drugs or just on drugs, because Guanajuato doesn't necessarily fit that mold. That's not the reason why we see violence so high. There's a multitude of reasons: extortion, and more importantly, the stealing of oil and fuel from the Mexican government, but not necessarily drugs. And the shooting yesterday in Salamanca, Guanajuato, that now subsequent reporting indicates about 11 people were killed, is a pattern we generally see in that state of these mass shootings and mass casualty events, generally done by the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, also known as CSRL by their Spanish acronyms, the Cartel de Santa Rosa de Lima, right? And the Santa Rosa de Lima it's just generally like a smaller cartel. They're actually, interestingly enough, were not designated as foreign terrorist organizations by the United States, and only until recently, last month, did we see the OFAC under the Treasury Department, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, issue sanctions against the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. Really, the first of its time that the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel received sanctions, and they got it specifically because of fuel and oil smuggling, oil theft. But they're a relatively minor player in the large construct of all these other Mexican cartels. And as shown, they're not a foreign terrorist organization. And one of the reasons why they're generally not considered a major player in Mexican cartels is because they're not a huge player in drug trafficking. Yes, they do drug trafficking, do not get me wrong, but that's not their main source of income and not really why they're known. And the irony of the situation is, even though they're a minor player, minor cartel, and a minor drug player, they're extremely violent. Extremely violent. And again, the rule of thumb is if you see a mass shooting attack in the state of Guanajuato, more than likely it's the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. And they do this all the time. They have conduct mass shootings in bars, nightclubs, tire shops, mechanics, normal civilian businesses, more higher end businesses, clubs. They don't care. And a lot of times, even what they'll do is not only do they do the mass shootings, but they actually record it. And they show them entering into these areas, doing these mass shootings, and then they upload it either on WhatsApp or Telegram in these kind of large messaging groups so that it gets distributed for them to show. And then they release, a lot of times they'll also leave a narco message to kind of claim that responsibility, right, where they did this mass shooting. Again, the Santa Rosa Lima cartel, very violent, but they're one of the main players in the state of Guanajuato. The other main player is the Jalisco New Generation cartel. That's another main player. And both the Santa Rosa Lima cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel are involved in a very bloody conflict for control of the state. The Santa Rosa Lima cartel, as part are known to have an alliance with the Mayito Flacos of the Sinaloa cartel and the Scorpion group out of Matamoros, Tamaulipas. So they do have some allies, while the Jalisco Generation cartel has a very strong predominant presence with a lot of players there that I'll kind of go later on in the video. But with that, I'm going to first start with giving you the news that we saw yesterday in the mass shooting in Salamanca, and then we'll go to active cartel map to show you kind of this territorial analysis specifically. So as you see here, I'm using the SITREP app. This is the desktop version. It's also available on Apple and Google's Play Store. It's a phenomenal app. I use this all the time. Actually helps me keep up to date to all the situation that's going on in Mexico. It gives you news for all the countries around the world, and I use this a lot to kind of maintain coverage inside of Mexico, as shown here. again, you can do any country around the world. If you're interested in Iran, the Middle East, Europe, each country has its own dedicated fee, and the analysis for each of these countries and each of the reports is geared towards that specific country. And here in Mexico, they have great, phenomenal analysis. In the cartel situation, I use it a lot. And as you see here, yesterday, the first report that we got when the mass shooting happens, which is, I'm using this report because it's the first one that was sent yesterday night, Eastern Standard Time. And initially we got was 17 fatalities. That figure has now dropped to 11, but it was still a mass casualty event. And again, it shows what happened was it was as a mass shooting. It was at a football match in the community of Loma de Flores in Salamanca. 17 originally, now it's down to 11 fatalities. And again, we still to this day don't really know who was responsible for this attack. But however, again, as I mentioned earlier, more than likely it was the Santa Rosa Lima cartel because it kind of follows their MO. One of the reasons why it's important, and again, from the reporting that we got, is that it was multiple gunmen that arrived in several vehicles. So it was a convoy of vehicles, went up to the soccer match and just opened fired while the soccer match was playing in the local community. Again, this wasn't a professional in the sense of this major football team or anything like that. It was just a normal soccer match that was going on, probably just a normal community amateur soccer, more than likely what's happened. But the key component was this was a convoy. This wasn't a lone gunman. Maybe a lot of times, and for those in the United States, when you hear mass shooting, 9 times out of 10 is one lone gunman kind of goes in and does this mass shooting. No, this was a convoy of vehicles. They arrived in the area and then just opened fire and caused the mass casualties. And again, in the state of Guanajuato, the Santa Rosa Lima cartel is the main culprit. But again, I just wanted to show you this original report from SITREP. And now I'll go to Active Cartel Map to give you the latest situation inside of the state of Guanajuato between the violence of the Santa Rosa Lima cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. So as you see here, again, from Active Cartel Map, this is kind of the map that shows you the territorial control and influence within the state of Guanajuato. Again, just as a reminder, just because there's a predominant color within a specific area, that generally indicates that this is the primary cartel that has the most amount of influence, but that doesn't mean there aren't other groups that are active in this area. I've seen a lot of maps kind of laying out the state of Guanajuato, kind of the territorial influence and control, either between the Santa Rosa Lima cartel, which again has an alliance with those Maito Flacos, which is one of the Sinaloa cartel factions, and they also have an alliance with Scorpion Group out of Matamoros, Tamaulipas, borders Brownsville, Texas, and then the rivals, the Jalisco New Generation cartel. If some of these maps in Guanajuato might show the Santa Rosa Lima cartel has much, like a higher percentage of control of the state of Guanajuato. I generally don't agree with those assessments. I think the Santa Rosa Lima cartel has a smaller role in significant territorial control in the state of Guanajuato compared to others. And in this map, as you see right here, I mean, this is the primary area of the Santa Rosa Lima cartel. This right here, this picture up here that you see, this was from earlier, like 2020 or 2021. I can't remember the top of my head, but this is El Marro. This is the leader of the Santa Rosa Lima cartel. He's right now in prison inside of Mexico. He was actually sanctioned. And when I talked about earlier, the sanction about the leader of the Santa Rosa Lima cartel, this is the individual who's sanctioned, who's in prison right now in Mexico. And the funny situation is that the Treasury Department, when they sanctioned El Marro, says, yeah, he's still running the cartel from behind prison. Even though he's in a Mexican prison, he's still running the operations of the Santa Rosa cartel from prison. This is one of the main reasons why the United States has been pressuring the Mexican government. All these cartel leaders in prison right now inside of Mexico. This is one of the reasons why they say, hey, send them over to the U.S. These guys are, once they go to U.S. prisons, that's when they lose all their power and influence. So, this is one of the very interesting aspects that we see. As you see, again, when I say it's a very small territorial control, and here, the city of Salamanca, this is kind of where the shooting happened, Loma del Rey, and again, what's interesting is this might require a little bit more of updating the territorial control, but the fact that the shooting happened in an area generally associated with the Santa Rosa Lima cartel, again, it could definitely be the Jalisco New Generation cartel, but this MO generally fits them. The Santa Rosa Lima cartel is one of those cartels that has very, very little concern for the overall situation and violence that happens. They have a very high level of propensity to do violence against the civilian population. And much more so than other cartels. And I'm not trying to say that, for example, Jalisco New Generation cartel are, not so concerned about violence from the civilian populations. Of course they are. But if we're going to be honest in our analysis, there's one cartel that generally has a much higher level of propensity of utilizing violence compared to another one. And if you're going to rack and stack them, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel is the highest one. Even in areas that they generally have a predominance of territorial control or influence, they still use high level of violence to maintain that level of control. Much more so than others, much more so than the Jalisco New Generation cartel, even CDN, that I would consider another very, very violent cartel if you were to rack and stack them. The Santa Rosa de Lima cartel would be my number one, kind of the list of this. And this is one of the main cartels. And even if you see here, very small level of control. I mean, this is kind of the disputed territories that you might see between Jalisco New Generation cartel, Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, kind of in the areas with Michoacan, very much bordering in this area, right? This is kind of the border area between Michoacan. You see Morelia here, and then you kind of go up here to the state of Guanajuato. Irapuato is a major town as well. This is definitive territorial control of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. It's extremely small. I mean, let's just zoom out. I mean, this is all of Mexico. That's it. This little black symbol, that's the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. And this group is probably one of the main reasons why violence is so high in Guanajuato. Why Guanajuato is the most violent state in Mexico, or one of the most violent states in Mexico. This is the group that is very likely responsible for the vast majority of assassinations targeting local police in the state of Guanajuato. Now, from the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel perspective, is that the municipal police in Guanajuato is being paid and controlled by the Jalisco New Generation cartel right here, which is, it's true. I mean, there's high levels of corruption for all police department, and CJNG probably has a very strong influence within the local police. We've seen the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel do car bombings. I mean, they've literally done car bombings targeting the municipal police. And again, that's an important factor when you're discussing them, right? The Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, although they're not a foreign terrorist organization, as I said, was sanctioned, and that sanction that targeted El Marro. The reason why they were sanctioned was because they are involved in a lot of the oil smuggling operations and fuel theft. There's a lot of key refineries in the state of Guanajuato. The Mexican national oil company called Pemex has a lot of refineries and kind of pipelines that operate in Guanajuato. And the Santa Rosa Lima cartel is very well known to kind of tap into those and steal that oil and then use that themselves to sell it either to Mexico or other parts around the world to try to make a profit. Drug-wise, again, they're not a major drug player. I have seen some cases of Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, and I actually have a video on my X account showing a Santa Rosa de Lima cartel operative with drugs trying to sell it in Chicago. But again, they're not a major drug player. The vast majority of their money is through either oil and fuel smuggling, or more importantly, through oil. And again, the Jalisco New Generation cartel in Guanajuato, there's a lot of key players that operate and have base of operation in Guanajuato. But the primary one you want to be looking at is a guy named Doble R, or the double R. He's a key Jalisco New Generation cartel leader who's active in Guanajuato and Jalisco, but his main base of support is in Guanajuato. And actually, there's been multiple times where Doble R was rumored to be almost captured by Mexican authorities, either special forces, the military, National Guard, and Jalisco New Generation cartel and his groups, the double R group. Then that's when they kind of go out, and when you see narco blockades and a lot of burning of businesses all kind of in one night in the state of Guanajuato, it's generally because Doble R is on the ropes and he's about to get captured, and then he sends his gunmen out to kind of overwhelm and paralyze the Mexican National Guard to enable his escape. And we've seen that a couple times happen in Guanajuato, and that's because Doble R does that. And so we've seen narco blockades, burning of businesses, attacks, and that enables him to escape. And Doble R is kind of the key figure of the Jalisco New Generation cartel in the state of Guanajuato. So I just pulled up the sanctions list against Doble R right here, Ricardo Ruiz Velasco. Again, I mean, he's affiliated with the Special Forces unit of Jalisco New Generation cartel. I mean, okay, so let's just make this abundantly clear. I know the Treasury Department said that, I mean, they're not a true Special Forces. They're called Grupo Elite, or the elite group. Okay, let's put it in context what we're referring to when we talk about Jalisco New Generation cartel Special Forces. Let's tone it down. they're not even special compared to the Mexican special forces. Like if I were to look at like the Mexican tier 1 unit, which would be like los murciélagos or the bats, like okay, that's a legit, foreign military special forces, right? They have really good capabilities. In many ways, you can almost compare them to some of our special forces in the United States military, not our tier 1, obviously, but a lot of their trainings and even some of their capabilities, the murciélagos, could operate side by side easily with, let's say, the U.S. Navy SEALs or U.S. Special Forces, the Green Berets, and we do know that U.S. Special Forces and Navy SEALs train the murciélagos, the Mexican Special Forces, right? And they do that. And if there's ever a scenario where we might see joint operations between U.S. and Mexican Special Forces, you probably would see those murciélagos fight side by side with either American Special Forces or Navy SEALs, right? Or even MARSOC. And those type of elements, you would see that coordination. And you could look at the murciélagos in many ways similar to that, but not to our tier 1 Delta or SEAL Team 6. And so if we're using that for the Mexican Special Forces, I just want to make that abundantly clear, generally with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, especially the group under Ricardo Ruiz, is lower than that. Like the true, let's say, elite of the elites of Mexican cartels are very, very small groups, very small factions, generally reserved to protect the top of a cartel figure, right? And they're very, very small. The Jalisco Generation Cartel loves to throw terms out there like, oh, we're special forces, everything, like the mental special forces, the elite group. They even have a group called Delta, right? Like kind of like, you can almost look at them as like they're trying to call themselves the Delta Force, like the U.S., and they even saw Grupo Delta, the Delta group. No, right? And that's the same with here. But, Doble R is known to operate in Guanajuato. He is also used a lot of the violence and killing of Jalisco state officials. And he was accused of assassinating influencers and stuff like that. So that's Doble R right there, who's probably the prime player of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in the state of Guanajuato. And again, when he's almost being targeted or captured, as I said earlier, he sends his gunmen out to kind of run amok and cause violence to go up. I'm going to show you guys now the sanctions for the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. So this is the sanctions from the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel that happened a couple months ago recently. Actually, let me just give you the exact date. I mean, just over a month ago, December 17th. Which again was interesting because the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel was never necessarily sanctioned before. They're not really, they weren't declared a foreign terrorist organization, even though they're extremely violent. But if we're going to use violence as a measure to declare a foreign terrorist organization, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel would fit that narrative because they're the ones that even do attacks that much more aligned with terrorist organizations for mass shootings, car bombings, etc. Right? That would be them. One of the very important aspects of the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, generally, if you're going to follow them and you track them, this is kind of the logo. But one of the key aspects you generally would see is they use as a red triangle and then the two hammers. Right? Not a hammer or sickle, it's two hammers. So it's two hammers and the red triangle. And again, their primary base of operations is Guanajuato. The red triangle is kind of like, think of it almost like the Bermuda Triangle of Guanajuato, which is kind of like three key areas of Guanajuato, really important in the oil smuggling. And if you read the sanction list, it really hits them, again, in Huachicol, which is oil theft and oil smuggling. That is their main aspects. Yes, they do drug smuggling. Very small player. Yes, they do a lot of extortion. That's probably much more than drugs. Huge in extortions inside of Guanajuato. But it's oil smuggling, oil theft, right? And they're very vocal and they love to show their violence. And this is kind of the key aspect of the sanctions. And that's the leader of El Marro. And this is the triangle I'm talking about, right? From Leon all the way down to other parts of Guanajuato, Salamanca, kind of the Bermuda Triangle regions of the city of Guanajuato. That's why they had that the triangle as their symbol, the red triangle, and this is kind of the areas that they operate. But I wouldn't necessarily say that they're the primary actors. I would agree more with active cartel map. Again, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel definitely has influence in these areas. From Leon, I mean, this is Union Leon is a very small player, right, in this state. But, they have a lot of influence in these areas, but they're not the primary actor. And I would agree that Jalisco New Generation Cartel, specifically in northern Guanajuato, is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is the primary player. And generally in southern Guanajuato is where you see the Santa Rosa de Lima Cartel, right, active and be the primary player, with this area being the disputed territory. And I would agree with that just because the sanctions list kind of lists this. Again, they have presence in these regions, but they're not the primary player. And even in the areas of Irapuato and Salamanca kind of shows why you see a lot of that violence going on there. El Marro, although he's prison, he was sanctioned, and that's kind of just a very ironic situation. This line right here, again, this is the alliance they have with the Maitza, the Maito Flacos. And if you actually read the sanctions, they say it down here. I know it's kind of low quality because that's how the Treasury Department wants to work. But one of the things is they have an alliance with the Maito Flacos, which we kind of knew. We did see the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. I have it on my Twitter page. Announce this alliance on social media multiple times between the Maito Flacos and the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. They have announced it. And the other group that they have an alliance with is right here is the Los Escorpiones, the Grupo Escorpion, which are these groups. If you see my video of Tamaulipas, this group right here, right, base of Matamoros, this whole group right here. And again, it kind of makes sense that they kind of had this this alliance with Jalisco New Generation Cartel being the kind of the main impediment. But again, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is engaged in a violent conflict with CDN, basically specifically through the groups, the Metros, with the Maito Flacos. They're engaged in a huge violence, and they're huge war with the Scorpion group. And so that's why we're kind of seeing that. Again, you know, I don't want to show you, obviously, the videos on YouTube, screen recording, because the video can get taken down and YouTube can take it down. But you can go to my Twitter page, just search on my post, Santa Rosa Lima Cartel, and you guys would have an idea of what I'm talking about, of all the violence that they've done. But again, you know, the Santa Rosa Lima Cartel, not a major drug player, very violent. And one of the main reasons why they're violent is because if all the cartels are now focusing from a territorial control, much more than, let's say, what we considered in the past transactional. Transactional was moving drugs north to south, that type of thing. Now is kind of controlling territory and leveraging that territory, not only to push drugs, but to also do extortion, taxation, etc. And they have to require a militarized force and violence to maintain that territorial control. Again, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel would be like the top of territorial cartels. If you want an example of a territorial cartel that uses violence above all else to maintain its territorial control, it's the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel. And they will do anything physically possible to do that. And again, car bombings, mass shootings. This shooting yesterday in Salamanca, they're the main suspect just because that's generally what we see them do. Even in areas that they have control, if they suspect, because cartels operate and they have operatives, even in areas that they're not the primary group, they still operate in these areas. Of course, even though Salamanca here is under Santa Rosa Lima cartel territory, of course, Jalisco New Generation Cartel still has a presence and they have operatives here. Of course they do, right? And that's why these guys would go out there. The other thing that the Santa Rosa Lima Cartel will do is if they suspect a business is involved in either serving as a front or money laundering for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, they'll go out and destroy it and kill everybody inside. No problem whatsoever, right? Much more violent than generally you would see from others. And I think that's what I want this video to be about, is how, just as I've talked about Michoacan, the avocado, and the lime, not necessarily drugs, explains a lot of violence. Here is not drugs. It's oil and extortion. Those are the two main reasons why, and not from a drug trade perspective, because even the OFAC station doesn't put too much emphasis on drugs. So I wanted to make this video about the situation in Guanajuato. I know it's kind of just an overview at top of the major players, El Marro, WR, Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Santa Rosa Lima Cartel, the Alliance and everything. But this is a perfect example where it's two cartels fighting for control, and these alliances that the Santa Rosa Lima Cartel, you can almost now start analyzing it from the broader context of these alliances forming inside of Mexico and violence just kind of going up across the Mexican state, with Guanajuato just being one of the multiple states that's seeing increased levels of violence. But with that, I want to thank you all for listening to this latest episode. Please let me know what you think, and let me know if there's another topic you want to discuss. I've already had one request for Querétaro, which I'll do soon. But if there's any other topics you want me to discuss, or if you have any questions, please make sure you comment below. Your likes are always appreciated. And with that, I wish you all a good rest of your day, and I'll see you guys soon.